From the sound of the church bells echoing among the Main Street buildings in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, you'd never know there was a problem of nature slowly encroaching on this peaceful town. And yet, there is a serious problem. The heart of the problem is the advancing shores of Devil's Lake itself. The lake is fairly large, 330 square miles in area, and around 20 miles long and perhaps half that size in width. But the size itself is not the problem. The problem is that there is no inlet or outlet for this lake. When it gets dry, the lake drops. It has been as low as 2 feet deep. And when it rains, the lake fills up. And when it rains more and continues to rain, too much over a 20-year period, the lake overflows its banks. If the lake got high enough, it would overflow into the Cheyenne River. However, the lake hasn't been that high for 1,000 years. This podcast is about how people interact with their environment. Teachers should provide their students with an outline map to have them find Devil's Lake and a terrain contour map so they can see that the area does not have significant elevation changes. Also, look for the possible river outlets if Devil's Lake became desperate enough to start pumping water out of the lake. You are listening to a podcast created by the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Our mission is to help you understand your world better through geography. The presenter is Lisa Zimmerman. Lisa is curator of the Lake Region Heritage Center in downtown Devil's Lake. She generously was willing to tell the story of Devil's Lake to us. The Lake Heritage Center is a great place to visit if you are in the neighborhood. Some podcast questions were asked by Dr. David Lannergren, director of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. On some devices, this podcast shows visuals, chapter controls, and clickable internet links. I am Fred Kunze, a member of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education.
Lisa, obviously the lake has gotten higher lately. What was it like when people first came to practice agriculture here?
When homesteading kind of became popular in North Dakota, it wasn't as high as it is now, but it was fairly large enough that they had ferry boats go across the lake. They used their boats for the postal service to kind of get around before roads and everything. So it was important. The reason people settled around around the area was because of the lake. Like I said, it wasn't as high as it is now, and it came all the way up to the city too. There were no dikes or anything. So Devil's Lake, Creel City, was actually on the lake when they came, and then it dried up. So back in the early 1900s, life around the lake was really popular. They had Chautauqua grounds, which was basically like cabin life on the lake, which was super popular. We have photos and stuff that you'll see when you go through. That died when the lake went down. That and the steamboats that were all on the lake and everything kind of just, it dried up, and that life that kind of surrounded the lake just disappeared with it. The lowest it got was about 2 feet deep in 1940, and then it started to rise again. So people had gotten used to life, with no lake, and built their roads and built their houses and everything. And when the lake began to rise in the 60s and 70s and 80s is when the flooding really kind of started, and they had to build up their roads, build the dikes and everything like that. And then 1993, it just exploded from there. 1993, they had a really rough winter. I think in the last 20 years, the lake has risen almost 32 feet.
32 feet?
Yep.
So how deep is it now?
I'm not sure at the deepest point, but probably 50 feet in its deepest part, yeah.
Wow, so there's been farms that have been flooded totally by the rising lake?
Yep, farmsteads taken out, and the tough thing about that is that those are original homestead sites for these families, so they've lost everything. And the difficult part also is that they built their homes on the highest point on their land, and unless your home is inundated with water, you don't get FEMA money for that. So there is no support for the farmers. There's a little bit that they've been trying to do, but there is no real support for the farmers losing their land and their livelihood. Yeah.
So I suppose legally they still own the land under the lake, right?
If they continue to pay taxes on it.
But if they pay taxes?
Yeah, if you don't pay your taxes, the state gets it back.
The state takes it back. Well, was this a big tourist or sportsman place promoted by the railroad to have hunters and fishermen come up here?
I wouldn't say, well, it was the railroad that brought, the reason the city is here, the lake, yes, affected homesteading and bringing everyone here, but the railroad stopping in Devil's Lake was huge for Devil's Lake, and it's the reason the city expanded. It went from 890 people in 1896 and then went to 5,000 in the next 30 years. So it really expanded during that time period, and I wouldn't say the railroad has expanded that. In the last 20 years, they've kind of used that silver lining of the flood to promote sportsmen to come out, fish, and hunt. The duck hunting is obviously superb here. We're right in the middle of this migratory pattern here between Canada and the South, and so that's always been kind of popular. Deer hunting and big game, not so much anymore. They've kind of hunted it out in the early 1900s, but yeah, the fishing has been...
How brackish or how salty is the lake? Does it taste salty when you taste it?
I'm not sure. I actually haven't spent too much time on the lake. Like I said, I've only been here 8 months, so I haven't been here a summer yet. But I know that was a big deal early on when settlers came and stuff like that. That was a problem of the salinity of the lake. Now, I think, it's still salty. I'm not really sure. But,
I suppose with all the new fresh water, it's not as salty as it was.
Yeah.
And the immigrant population here was from Norway primarily, I understand?
Mostly Scandinavian, yeah. Norway, Germany, Germans from Russia. We actually had a small Jewish population as well, which was pretty popular in the early 1900s. Obviously, they're not around much anymore. Yep.
And what's the future?
Future?
Yeah,
hopefully.
What's going to happen to the lake?
Well, they don't know. Apparently, this whole up-down thing has happened a couple times in the last 2,000 years since the last glacial period, and they're really expecting it to probably go down. They don't know if it's going to be 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, but scientists are kind of leaning towards that it's cyclical, and it'll keep doing this up and down thing, and really it's out of our hands. Mother Nature is going to take over. There's not much that humans can do about it.
So there's been a big dike built around the airport, and the city of Devil's Lake has a dike, is that?
Yes, there's a couple dikes that kind of protect the city. When you're driving down College Ave, there's a mini H elementary school across from kind of like the mall there. The lake came up to that point. There was a big mini H boat that went from Fort Totten to Devil's Lake to Chautauqua and all that stuff, and that was her final resting place. So that was actually where the lake came up to. It was College Drive there.
Wow. And this is the courthouse for the Northwest District of North Dakota?
The federal courthouse from 1910 to 1946, I believe. Obviously, there's not a ton of federal crime in North Dakota, and so they closed
Peaceful North Dakota.
Yeah, they closed down us in Jamestown in 46.
Okay. And it's been a museum for how long?
Since 1980. 1977 was the last year the post office was here. It was just too much for the post office to take on the huge building, so they closed it down. And they moved to their little building about a block away. And then they were going to tear it down and sell the land. The State Historical Society stepped in and helped a local group kind of save the building, and then they took over as a museum. And they started filling it up with stuff. So.
Super.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is a great spot for people going through to stop and see your museum. Do you have any recommendations for them about when to come or?
Sure, yeah. We have an exhibit about the lake, everything I kind of just went over with artifacts and photos, which are really great. And then we also have an exhibit on the second floor. It's all about Devil's Lake and the lake region in the early 20s and 30s. There's some great stuff up there, too. We're open during the summer from Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4, and Sundays from noon to 4.
This Devil's Lake problem can be a rich source for discussion with your students about the geography theme of human-environment interaction. This is a serious and imminent problem for the Devil's Lake residents. Ask your students what might be done. Look at the consequences of those actions. And remind them that unthought-out solutions can result in unwanted consequences for the environment and other communities. You have been listening to a production of the Minnesota Alliance for Geographic Education. Background music is courtesy of Jim Hogue of Dakota, Iowa. Images and sounds from the internet have clickable credit links if your device allows that interaction. The Minnesota Alliance is a nonprofit group of volunteer educators who work to promote an enhanced understanding of our world through improved geographic literacy.